Pressure now to explain his thinking on the president himself.
So can you commit under oath that you have not and will not pursue a book or movie deal based on your experiences working for the president?
No.
You cannot commit to making money off of a book or movie deal based on your work?
No. There's two parts to your question. The first part of your question, you asked me whether or not I had spoken to people regarding a possible book deal. And I have. And I've spoken to people who have sought me out regarding a movie deal.
No, I didn't ask you if you'd
That was the
spoken to
first part of your
anybody.
question.
I said, can you commit under oath that you will not, that you have not and will not pursue a book deal?
And I will not do that, no.
Okay. Can you commit under oath that you will not pursue opportunities to provide commentary for a major news network based on your experiences working for the president?
No.
Can you commit under oath that you will not pursue political office in the state of New York?
No.
So you don't commit to changing your ways, basically, because you want to continue to use your background as a liar, a cheater, a convicted liar to make money. That's what you want to do.
And that's going to get me a book deal and a movie deal and television and a spot on television? I don't think so.
Well, it appears that it will. I yield my time, remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Jordan.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Cohen, in your sentencing statement to the court in December of last year, you said, "I want to apologize to the people of the United States. You deserve to know the truth." Approximately a month later, BuzzFeed News ran a story that was the story in the country for a couple days. BuzzFeed story ran January 17th, 2019. On January 18th, your counsel went on TV and wouldn't confirm or deny the story. The next day, the special counsel's office did something that's never happened. Never happened. They said the description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and the characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate. Why didn't your lawyer, the day that he's on TV, when this story is the biggest thing in the news in the country, why didn't he deny the BuzzFeed story?
Because I didn't think it was his responsibility to do that. We are not the fact checkers for BuzzFeed.
He's on TV to talk about the very story you committed to the court when you were trying to get your sentence reduced, that the American people deserve to know the truth. You had the golden opportunity to give them the truth on a false story, the BuzzFeed story, and your lawyer didn't say a thing. He actually he said this: "I can't confirm, I can't deny." You had an opportunity to do exactly what you told the judge you were going to do 1 month after you said it, and you didn't do it. Why not?
Again, it wasn't our responsibility to be the fact checker for the news agencies.
This is the biggest story in the country.
Please let me finish. The president says so far approximately 9,000.
I got 8 seconds. I got 8 seconds. I'll let you finish.
Chairman, may I please
The special counsel
Chairman, can I please finish?
Something they've never done. They said that story was false. Now you can respond.
Okay. My response. The president has told something over 9,000 lies to date. Do I ask Mr. Davis or Mr. Monaco, or do I go on television in order to correct his mistakes?
When Mr. Davis goes on to talk about that specific subject,
the answer is no. And I would like to...
Gentleman's time is... Listen up. The gentleman's time has expired. You may finish answering the question, and then we're going to go to Mr. Connolly.
All I wanted to say is I just find it interesting, sir, that between yourself and your colleagues, that not one question so far since I'm here has been asked about President Trump. That's actually why I thought I was coming today. Not to confess the mistakes that I've made. I've already done that. And I'll do it again every time you ask me about taxes or mistakes. Yes, I made my mistakes. I'll say it now again. And I'm going to pay the ultimate price. But I'm not here today, and the American people don't care about my taxes. They want to know what it is that I know about Mr. Trump. And not one question so far has been asked about Mr. Trump.
Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Cohen, based on your testimony and your 10-year experience, I think you can recognize the behavior you're being subjected to on the other side of the aisle. discredit, slander, use any trick in the book to prevent your testimony from sticking. The idea that a witness would come to us who's flawed, and you certainly are flawed, means they can never tell the truth, and there is no validity whatsoever to a single word they say, would discredit every single criminal trial of organized crime in the history of the United States, because all of them depend on someone who's turned. It would make RICO null and void. We couldn't use it anymore. This Congress historically has relied on all kinds of shady figures who turned. One of the most famous who led to the decapitation of the organized crime families in America, Joe Valachi, congressional hearing. He was a witness, and he committed a lot worse crimes than you're convicted of, Mr. Cohen. So don't be fooled by what my friends on the other side of the aisle are trying to do today. It is do everything but focus on the principle, known as individual number one in the Southern District of New York, as I recall. Is that correct, Mr. Cohen?
That is correct.
Now, Mr. Cohen, I want to ask you about something that's not in your testimony and that so far has not been made public. In our committee staff search of documents provided by the White House that were otherwise redacted or already in the public, and I guess the White House thought that was funny, they made one mistake, the White House. There was an email from a special assistant to the president to a deputy White House counsel, and the email is dated May 16th, 2017, and it says, and I quote, POTUS, meaning the president, requested a meeting on Thursday with Michael Cohen and Jay Sekulow. Any idea what this might be about? End quote. Do you recall being asked to come to the White House on or around that time? With Mr. Sekulow? May of 2017.
Off the top of my head, sir, I don't. I recall being in the White House with Jay Sekulow. It was in regard to the documents, the document production, as well as my appearance before the House Select Intel. But I'm not sure if that's specifically different. But what I will do is I will check all my records, and I'm more than happy to provide you with any documentation or a response to this question. Well,
that's you sort of touch on presumably the purpose of the discussion, at least among others. This meeting occurred just before your testimony before the Select Committee on Intelligence here in the House. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Was that a topic of conversation with the President himself?
If this is the specific instance that I was there with Mr. Sekulow, yes.
So you had a conversation with the President of the United States about your impending testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He wanted me to cooperate. He also wanted just to ensure, by making the statement, and I said it in my testimony, there is no Russia, there is no collusion, there is no deal. He goes, it's all a witch hunt, and he goes, this stuff has to end.
Did you take those comments to be suggestive of what might flavor your testimony?
Sir, he's been saying that to me for many, many months. And at the end of the day, I knew exactly what he wanted me to say.
And why was Mr. Sekulow in the meeting?
Because he was going to be representing Mr. Trump going forward as one of his personal attorneys in this matter.
So it was sort of a handoff meeting.
Correct.
In any way, final question, did the President in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting, yes, that's the message that he wanted to reinforce.
Gentleman's time has expired,
Thank you.
Mr. Massey.
Mr. Cohen, can you just clarify, did you say that at times you would do what you thought Mr. Trump wanted you to do, not specifically what he told you to do?
At times, yes.
So you just went on your intuition?
I don't know if I would call it intuition as much as I would just say my knowledge of what he wanted, because it happened before, and I knew what he had wanted.
Does a lawyer have a duty to provide his client with good legal advice?
Yes,
Were you a good lawyer to Mr. Trump?
I believe so.
When you arranged a payment to Ms. Clifford, you say in your testimony, I'm going to quote from your testimony, that you did so, quote, without bothering to consider whether that was improper, much less whether it was the right thing to do. You said that, unquote. That's your testimony today. You said you didn't even consider whether it was legal. How could you give your client legal advice when you're not even considering whether it's legal?
I did what I knew Mr. Trump wanted. This conversation with Mr. Trump
I didn't ask whether you're a good fixer. I asked whether you were a good lawyer.
Sometimes you have to melt both together. I needed to, at that time, ensure and protect Mr. Trump.
So-
And if I put my, which I'm clearly suffering the penalty of, I clearly erred on the side of wrong.
So you feel like, without bothering to consider whether it was proper, much less whether it was the right thing to do, by ignoring any conscience, if you have one, that you were protecting Mr. Trump.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand.
You feel that was how to protect, as his lawyer, you feel that you did a good job. You said you were a good lawyer, right?
That's
Is that
correct.
being a good lawyer? To not even consider whether it's legal or not?
I didn't work for the campaign. I was working and I was trying to protect
Say
Mr.
anything about
Trump.
a campaign.
I sat with Mr. Trump, and this goes back all the way to 2011. This wasn't the first scenario with Ms. Daniels.
Let's go back then.
So, my point is, this was an ongoing situation. It didn't just start in
Right.
October.
I wanna
Please,
go
you have
back.
to let me finish.
Well,
It started in October. It didn't start in
Let me
October. It
ask you
started
specifically
many
on that.
years early.
when were you disbarred?
Yesterday, from what I read in the paper.
Yesterday. When should you have been disbarred? Based on the legal counsel you were giving your client.
I don't have an answer for your question.
How long were you counsel for Mr. Trump?
Since 2007.
When is the first time you gave him bad legal advice or failed to inform him of his legal obligations, as you testified today you did in the case of the payment to Ms. Clifford? When was the first time you did that? Would that qualify for disbarment?
I don't know, sir. I'm not the Bar Association.
I think you should consult with them maybe occasionally on some of these things.
Well, there's no point now. I lost my law license.
Has anybody else promised to pay Mr. Davis for representing you?
No.
Nobody has.
No. Are you offering?
Question, quickly. July, you said, and this is also in your testimony, in the days before the Democratic Convention, you became privy to a conversation that some of Hillary Clinton's emails would be leaked. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was that you said late July? Do you know the exact day?
I believe it was either the 18th or the 19th, and I would guess that it would be on the 19th.
But it was definitely July.
I believe so, yes.
Do you know that was public knowledge in June? This was Mr. Assange, and I'd like to submit this, unanimous consent to submit this for the record.
Without objection, so
Mr. Assange reported to the media on June 12th that those emails would be leaked. So I'm not saying you have fake news, I'm saying you have old news, and there's really not much to that. I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cohen, I'm quoting you close I can. Earlier said, I spent last week looking through boxes to find documents that would support your accusations. Where are those boxes, good sir? Where are those boxes? Are they in your garage? Or?
They're in the storage.
And are these not boxes that should have been turned over to investigative authorities during the many criminal investigations you've been subject to?
Sir, these are the boxes that were returned to me post the
If
raid.
they include data pertinent to crimes that you've committed, should they not have been turned over and remanded to investigative authority? Did Mr. Lanny Davis know of these boxes?
The gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the question.
I don't understand his question, sir.
Very well. Christian Morsi.
Mr. Cohen. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Cummings, for convening this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Cohen, for voluntarily testifying this morning. Mr. Cohen, you were the Executive Vice President and Special Counsel for the Trump Organization, correct?
I was the Executive Vice President, Special Counsel to Donald J. Trump.
And Special Counsel means you were the attorney for him, is that right?
Just means I was there in order to handle matters that he felt were significant and important to him individually.
And those included legal matters?
Yes, sir.
Sir, as a former attorney, you're familiar with legal documents known as non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, is that right?
Yes.
Sir, I'm sure you know that NDAs properly written in scope can be reasonable in certain business contexts, but they can also be abused to create a chilling effect to silence people, as we've seen in the Me Too movement and other places. Isn't that right, Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
And Mr. Cohen, the Trump Organization used NDAs extensively, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Mr. Cohen, I'm reading from a recent Washington Post article regarding the language in one of these types of NDAs where the terms were described as very broad. For instance, the terms confidential information was defined to be anything that, quote, Mr. Trump insists remain private or confidential, including but not limited to any information with respect to the personal life, political affairs, and or business affairs of Mr. Trump or any family member, close quote. Do those terms sound familiar to you?
I've seen that document.
In fact, there's a class action lawsuit filed this month by former Trump campaign worker Jessica Denson that this NDA language is illegal because it is too broad, too vague, and would be used to retaliate against employees who complain of illegality or wrongdoing. Would you agree that in the use of these types of NDAs with this type of language, and later when Donald Trump sought to enforce them, that he intended to prevent people from coming forward with claims of wrongdoing?
Yes.
Would you agree that the effect of the use of these NDAs and their enforcement was to have a chilling effect on people or silence them from coming forward?
I apologize. If you want to define chilling, I'm not sure.
Oh, just that he would, in using these NDAs or trying to enforce them, would basically try to keep people silent.
That was the goal.
And nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through President Donald Trump, correct?
That's 100% certain.
Okay. Mr. Cohen, do you believe that there are people out there today, either from the president's business or personal life, who are not coming forward to tell their stories of wrongdoing because of the president's use of NDAs against them?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Sir, I have a couple other questions for you. When was the last communication with President Trump or someone acting on his behalf?
I don't have the specific date, but it was a while ago.
Okay. Do you have a general time frame?
I would suspect it was within 2 months post the raid of my my home.
Okay, so
hotel.
Early fall of last year, generally.
Generally.
And what did he or his agent communicate to you?
Unfortunately, this topic is actually something that's being investigated right now by the Southern District of New York, and I've been asked by them not to discuss and not to talk about these issues.
Fair enough. Is there any other wrongdoing or illegal act that you are aware of regarding Donald Trump that we haven't yet discussed today?
Yes, and again, those are part of the investigation that's currently being looked at by the Southern District of New York.
Sir, Congressman Cooper asked you about whether you were aware of any physical violence committed by President Trump. I just have a couple quick questions. Do you have any knowledge of President Trump abusing any controlled substances?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Do you have any knowledge of President Trump being delinquent on any alimony or child care payments?
I'm not aware of any of that.
Do you have any knowledge of President Trump arranging any health care procedures for any women not in his family?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Cohen, can you tell me the significance of May 6th?
In terms of, sir?
A couple months from now.
That's the day that I need to surrender
Yes,
to
sir.
federal prison.
Could you, for the record, state what you've been convicted of?
I've been convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion. There's 1 count of misrepresentation of documents to a bank. There's 2 counts, one dealing with campaign finance for Karen McDougal, 1 count of campaign finance violation for Stormy Daniels, as well as lying to Congress.
Thank you. Can you state what your official title with the campaign was?
I did not have a campaign title.
And your position in the Trump administration?
I did not have one.
Okay, in today's testimony, you said that you were not looking to work in the White House. The Southern District of New York, in their statement, their sentencing memo, says this: Cohen's criminal violations in the federal election laws were also stirred, like others, crimes by his own ambition and greed. Cohen privately told friends, colleagues, and including seized text messages that he expected to be given a prominent role in the new administration. When that did not materialize, Cohen found a way to monetize his relationship in excess with the president. So, were they lying or were you lying today?
I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm just saying it's not accurate. I did not want to go to the White House. I retained, and I brought an attorney in, and I sat with Mr. Trump, with him, for well over an hour, explaining the importance of having a personal attorney, that every president has had one, in order to handle matters like the matters I was dealing with, which included, say, like Summer Zervos, Stormy Daniels, I was dealing with Stephanie Clifford, and other personal matters that needed.
Memo. Excuse me, this is my time. Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to submit the sentencing memo from the Southern District of New York for the record.
Without objection, to order.
All right, I'll get that to you in a second. Okay, this memo states that you committed 4 distinct federal crimes over a period of several years. You were motivated to do so by personal greed and repeatedly used your power to influence for deceptive ends. It goes on to say that they each involved, they were distinct in their harms, but bear a common set of characteristics, that they involved deception and were each motivated by personal greed and ambition. There's a lot we don't know in regards to this investigation, but here's what we do know. We know that you were expecting a job at the White House and didn't get it. You made millions lying about your close access to the president. You have a history of lying for personal gain, including that's banks, about your accountant, to law enforcement, your family, the Congress, the American people. The Southern District of New York, you've said that you did all this out of blind loyalty to Mr. Trump, but your sentencing memo states this: this was not an act out of blind loyalty, as Cohen suggests. Cohen was driven by a desire to further ingratiate himself with a potential future president for whom. Will you today to commit to donate any further proceeds to book deals, to film reviews, to charity?
No.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Will the gentleman yield?
Now,
Will the gentleman yield?
now, may I finish?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yield to Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish?
Mr. Cohen,
May I finish my?
Mr. Cohen, he's yielded to me, and so
I didn't finish, sir, my response.
Listen, everything's been made.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish my response, please?
I'll let you respond, but let's answer his question, please.
Mr. Cohen, everything's been made of your lies in the past. I'm concerned about your lies today. Under your testimony just a few minutes ago, to me, you indicated that you had contracts with foreign entities. And yet we have a truth and testimony disclosure form which requires you to list those foreign contracts for the last 2 years, and you put NA on there. And it's a criminal offense to not have that accurately. So when were you lying? Either in the testimony to me earlier today or when you filled out the form?
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Cohen, you may answer his question and then whatever you want to say on it.
His question is, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for his question. But as
Well, no, Mr. Chairman.
as it relates,
The gentleman is out of order. He said he does not have an answer.
Mr. Chairman, when we were in the majority, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, hold on.
Regular order. The gentleman has just said he doesn't have an answer. And you had already gone over your time.
He's under oath to tell the truth. One of them is not accurate, Mr. Chairman.
You will have time to answer the
Mr.
question.
Chairman, just a question, Mr. Chairman, just a question.
Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Cohen, thank you for your composure today. Our colleagues are not upset because you lied to Congress for the president. They're upset because you stopped lying to Congress for the president. Now, you've described the Trump campaign as a once-in-a-lifetime money-making opportunity, the greatest infomercial of all time, I think you said, and this may be the most trenchant observation of your whole testimony. Do you think the Trump campaign or presidency ever stopped being about making money for the president, his family, and his organization?
yes,
When did it stop being that?
when he won the election.
And what did it become about at that point?
Then it had to be about figuring out what to do here in Washington.
Can you carefully explain to America how the hush money payments to Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels worked? Can you carefully explain what catch and kill is?
Sure. I received a phone call regarding both Karen McDougal as well as Stormy Daniels, obviously at different times, stating that there were issues that were going to be damaging to Mr. Trump. With the Stormy Daniels, it started in 2011 when she wanted to have something removed from a website. And that was the first time I met Keith David. I spoke with Keith Davidson, her then acting attorney, and we were successful in having it taken down from the website. It wasn't until years later, by around the time of the campaign, did they come back and they ask, what are you going to do now, because she's back on the trail trying to sell the story. At which point in time, David Pecker, on behalf of the National Enquirer, reached out to her and her attorney in order to go take a look at lie detector test that would prove that she was telling the truth. They then contacted me and told me that she was telling the truth, at which point, again, all the time...
She took a lie detector test.
She allegedly took a lie detector test and was seen by an employee of the National Enquirer. At which point in time, I went straight into Mr. Trump's office and I explained why this time it's different than another time.
Okay, now when you say different than another time, were there other women paid sexual hush money by Donald Trump or his organization? Was this a standard operating practice?
No.
So you're not aware of any other cases where it had taken place?
I'm not aware of any other case that Mr. Trump paid. So which brings us to the Karen McDougal. He was supposed to pay. He was supposed to pay $125,000 for the life story of Karen McDougal. For whatever the reason may be, he elected not to pay it. David Pecker was very angry because there was also other monies that David had expended on his behalf. Unfortunately, David never got paid back for that either.
So David Pecker had done this in other cases of other mistresses or women?
Other circumstances, yes.
Okay.
Not all of them had to do with women.
Are you aware of anything that the president has done at home or abroad that may have subjected him to or may subject him to extortion or blackmail?
I am not, no.
Okay. Are you aware of any videotapes that may be the subject of extortion or blackmail?
I've heard about these tapes for a long time. I've had many people contact me over the years. I have no reason to believe that that tape exists.
In December 2015, Donald Trump was asked about his relationship with Felix Sater, a convicted felon and real estate developer, and he replied, "Felix Sater, boy, have to even think about it. I'm not that familiar with him." Why did Trump endeavor to hide his relationship with Felix Sater, and what was his relationship?
Well, he certainly had a relationship. Felix was a partner in a company called Bayrock that was involved in the deal of the Trump Soho Hotel, as well as, I believe, the Trump Fort Lauderdale project. Why did he want to distance himself? That's what Mr. Trump does. He distances himself when things go bad for someone. And at that point in time, it was going bad for Mr. Sater.
You said you lied to Congress about Trump's negotiations to build his Moscow tower because he'd made it clear to you that he wanted you to lie. One of the reasons you knew this is because, quote, Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow tower negotiations before I gave it. So this is a pretty breathtaking claim, and I just want to get to the facts here. Which specific lawyers reviewed and edited your statement to Congress on the Moscow tower negotiations, and did they make any changes to your statement?
There were changes made, additions. Jay Sekulow, for one.
Were there changes about the timing? The question of...
Gentleman's time has expired. You may answer that question.
There were several changes that were made, including how we were going to handle that message.
Mr.
Which was...
will you finish?
Yes, the message, of course, being the length of time that the Trump Tower Moscow project stayed and remained alive.
That was one of the changes.
Yes.
Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to clear up something, just a little something that bothers me. You started off your testimony, and you said, I think, in response to some question, that President Trump never expected to win. I just want to clarify that I dealt with President Trump several times as he was trying to get Wisconsin. He was always confident. He was working very hard. And this idea that somehow he was just running to raise his profile for some future adventure, at least in my experience, it was preposterous. And I always find it offensive when anti-Trump people imply that he just did this on a lark and didn't expect to win. But be that as it may, my first question concerns your relationship with the court. Do you expect, right now I think you're sentenced to 3 years, correct?
That's correct.
Do you expect any time using this testimony, other testimony, after you get done doing whatever you're going to do this week, do you ever expect to go back and ask for any sort of reduction in sentence?
Yes, there are ongoing...
You're watching BBC News, and our coverage continues from Washington, D.C., where President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is still giving evidence to this congressional committee on Capitol Hill. Some pretty explosive testimony so far. The questioning now continuing from the membership of this big committee. So stay with us, and the evidence continues.
It's a relatively light 3-year sentence. Do you expect to go back and ask for a further reduction?
Based off of my appearance here today?
Well, based upon whatever you do between now and your request for...
The Rule 35 motion is in the complete hands of the Southern District of New York. And the way the Rule 35 motion works is what you're supposed to do is provide them with information that leads to ongoing investigations. I am currently working with them right now on several other issues of investigation that concerns them that they're looking at. If those investigations become fruitful, then there is a possibility for a Rule 35 motion. And I don't know what the benefit in terms of time would be, but this congressional hearing today is not going to be the basis of a Rule 35 motion. I wish it was, but it's not.
I'd like to yield some time to Congressman Jordan.
Yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to come back to the question I asked before with regards to your false statement that you submitted to Congress. On here, it was very clear that it asked for contracts with foreign entities over the last 2 years. Have you had any foreign contract with foreign entities, whether it's Novartis or the Korean Airline or Kazakhstan BTA Bank? Your testimony earlier said that you had contracts with them. In fact, you went into detail.
I believe it talks about lobbying. I did no lobbying. On top of that, they are not government.
I'm not asking about lobbying, Mr. Cohen.
They are not government agencies.
Do you have foreign
publicly
contracts?
Traded companies?
Do you have foreign contracts?
I currently have no foreign.
Did you have foreign contracts over the last 2 years?
Foreign contracts.
contracts with foreign entities. Did you have
Yes.
contracts? Yes.
Yes.
Why didn't you put them on the form? It says it's a criminal offense to not put them on this form for the last 2 years. Why did you not do that?
Because those foreign companies that you're referring to are not government companies.
It says non-governmental, Mr. Cohen. You signed it.
They're talking about me as being non-governmental.
No, and right, it says foreign agency. It says foreign contracts. Do you want us to read it to you?
I read it, and it was reviewed by my counsel, and I am a non-government employee. It was not lobbying, and they are not foreign.
This has nothing to do with lobbying. It says it's a criminal offense to not list all your foreign contracts. That's what it says.
Well, then I'm going to take a look at it before I leave.
No, you've heard it.
I will, and hopefully I will amend it prior to leaving, because that's not the way I read your document.
You know, it's just one more example, Mr. Cohen, of you skirting the truth. Okay, I want to ask one other question.
Sure.
One other question, Mr. Cohen. It's my time, not yours. Were you advised, or was your counsel advised, to withhold your written testimony to the latest possible date, as John Dean said last night on CNN?
Was it my what?
Were you advised, or was your counsel advised, to withhold your written testimony to this committee at the latest possible date, to get it to this committee at the latest possible date, as John Dean said that he advised you? Yes or no?
No. We will.
He never advised you.
John Dean? I've never spoken with John Dean.
Has he spoken to your attorney?
I don't know. I've never spoken.
Well, ask
to John
your
Dean.
attorney. He's right
We were
there behind
working
you.
last night till 11, 12 o'clock at
You've
night.
known that you've been coming for some time.
We were working till 11, 12 o'clock last night to finish everything.
So you were writing it last night, Mr. Cohen?
we were
Don't
making
give me
edits.
that bull.
We were making edits all the way through the night. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, in November 2013, President Donald Trump testified under oath in a lawsuit related to the failed real estate project, Trump International Hotel and Tower in Fort Lauderdale. During the deposition, President Trump was asked about his knowledge of Felix Sater, a Russian-born real estate developer and convicted member of the Russian mafia, who, according to press reports, pled guilty for his role in a $40 million stock manipulation scheme. And it's worth noting, as well publicized, the direct relationship between the Russian mafia and the Kremlin. Over the years, President Trump was asked how many times he interacted with convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater. In 2013, President Trump testified that, quote, "Not many. If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like," unquote. Mr. Cohen, as you previously testified, isn't it true that President Trump knew convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater in 2013 when he made that statement?
Yes.
Isn't it true that because of Mr. Sater's relationship to the Trump organization, that he had an office in the Trump Tower?
And on the 26th floor, Mr. Trump.
And the 26th floor is important. Why?
Because it's Mr. Trump's floor.
So he had an office on the same floor as President Trump.
In fact, his office, when he left, became my office.
And isn't it also true that convicted Russian mobster Sater even had business cards indicating that he was a senior advisor to Donald Trump, as reported by the Washington Post?
Yes.
Did convicted Russian mobster Sater pay rent for his office?
No, he did not.
So, based on those facts, isn't it true that President Trump misled at best, or worse, lied under oath?
Yes.
In December 2015, President Trump was asked again about his relationship to convicted Russian mobster Mr. Sater by a reporter for the Associated Press. He stated, quote, "Felix Sater, boy, I have to even think about it," unquote. He added, quote, "I'm not that familiar with him," unquote. Mr. Cohen, where would we find business records that explain the president's relationship to the convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater? Would those be in the Trump organization's files?
They'd be in the Trump organization's files. There would be CCs to Bayrock, which was the name of Mr. Sater's company, I suspect on Mr. Sater's email address, possibly hard files in possession of Mr. Sater.
And when you say in possession of the Trump Organization, where?
It depends upon who the attorney was that was working on it. Now it would probably be in a box, off-site. They have a storage facility that they put old files.
In addition to convicted Russian mobster Sater, do you know of any other ties to convicted or alleged mobsters President Trump may have?
I am not aware.
Is it true that many people with ties to Russia ultimately bought condos in Trump properties, usually for cash? And if so, how many are we talking? 10, 20, 50?
I'm not, honestly, sir, I'm not aware of any. Yeah, the statement that you're referring to, I believe, was made by either Eric or Don, and I don't agree with it.
So are you aware of any cash purchases by Russian oligarchs and family members of Trump properties?
I'm not aware of that. I can tell you when you say cash, if you mean walking in with a satchel of rubles, the answer is I've never seen that happen. I've never heard of it. I will tell you when we sold Mr. Trump's property in Palm Beach, the home for $95 million, it came in by wire, and that came from Mr. Rybolovlev's bank account.
One other question. You also talked about President Trump doing negotiations throughout the campaign regarding the Trump Tower in Moscow. Was he directly involved in those negotiations? And if so, how do you know?
Well, the answer is yes. And as it relates to negotiations, it was merely follow-ups as to what's currently happening, what's happening with Russia, meaning he wanted me to give him a status report. The problem with this is that the project never advanced because they were unable, Mr. Sater was unable to provide me with proof that somebody owned or controlled a piece of property that we can actually build on.
The gentleman's time has expired, Mr. Marsh.
Mr. Cohen, why did Mr. Trump choose to hire you, and why did he trust you with the various tasks that you performed for him?
I don't know, sir. You would have to ask him that question.
Well, we've heard here that you have bad character. You've admitted to that over the years. You have no idea why he chose to hire you.
In 2006, I was asked by Don Jr. to come meet with his father. I did. He then followed up by asking if I would take a look at an issue that was occurring at Trump World Tower with the board. I went ahead and I looked into it, and I found that the statements that the board were making about Mr. Trump were inaccurate. And the reason Don came to me is because I had an apartment there for investment. My parents had an apartment there. My in-laws lived there. Friends of mine, we all bought as a big block from a brokerage company. We got a good price on each unit. And we ultimately turned over the board, and I became actually the treasurer of the board because the out-of-control spending was going to put the building into bankruptcy. And I was proud to say that within a year, we had plus $1 million versus minus 1.3. At the end of the day, Mr. Trump appreciated that, and he tasked me with something else. It was to handle a problem that Don Jr. had created in terms of a business, a license deal, and we resolved that. And then on top of that, the third time, Mr. Trump had asked me to take a look at the third Trump Entertainment Resort Chapter 11 reorganization, because he had a series of questions that he wanted answered. And I read these two stacked books, gave him the answers that he needed, and with that, the next time I was sitting in his office, and he asked me if I was happy at the sleepy old firm that I was with. I said yes. He said, would you rather work for me? And I asked him, will you offer me a job? And he said, yeah. And we negotiated, and I actually never went back to my office.
All right. But you've suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. Isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions.
Well, you're watching continuing coverage on the BBC of Donald Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. Now, for nearly 3 hours, we have heard extraordinary and blistering testimony to Congress. The president's disgraced former attorney accused him of criminal conduct whilst in office. Well, in an explosive opening statement, Mr. Cohen alleged Donald Trump is a racist, a con man and a cheat. He claimed he knew in advance about a leak of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton in the 2016 elections. And Mr. Cohen produced what he called evidence of the president paying hush money over an alleged affair he had with an adult film star. If you missed it, let's hear some of that statement.
A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee email, ahead of time. And the answer is yes. As I earlier stated, Mr. Trump knew from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks drop of emails. In July of 2016, days before the Democratic convention, I was in Mr. Trump's office when his secretary announced that Roger Stone was on the phone. Mr. Trump put Mr. Stone on the speakerphone. Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange, and that Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Mr. Trump responded by stating to the effect, "Wouldn't that be great?" Mr. Trump is a racist. The country has seen Mr. Trump court white supremacists and bigots. You have heard him call poorer countries shitholes. In private, he is even worse. He once asked me if I could name a country run by a black person that wasn't a shithole. This was when Barack Obama was president of the United States. And while we were once driving through a struggling neighborhood in Chicago, he commented that only black people could live that way. And he told me that black people would never vote for him because they were too stupid. And yet, I continued to work for him. Mr. Trump is a con man. He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair and to lie about it to his wife, which I did. And lying to the First Lady is one of my biggest regrets because she is a kind, good person, and I respect her greatly, and she did not deserve that. And I'm giving the committee today a copy of the $130,000 wire transfer from me to Ms. Clifford's attorney during the closing days of the presidential campaign that was demanded by Ms. Clifford to maintain her silence about her affair with Mr. Trump. And this is Exhibit 4 to my testimony. Mr. Trump directed me to use my own personal funds from a home equity line of credit to avoid any money being traced back to him that could negatively impact his campaign. And I did that too, without bothering to consider whether that was improper, much less whether it was the right thing to do or how it would impact me, my family, or the public. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later. As Exhibit 5A to my testimony shows, I am providing a copy of a $35,000 check that President Trump personally signed from his personal bank account on August 1st of 2017, when he was President of the United States, pursuant to the cover-up, which was the basis of my guilty plea to reimburse me, the word used by Mr. Trump's TV lawyer for the illegal hush money I paid on his behalf. This $35,000 check was one of 11 check installments that was paid throughout the year while he was president. Other checks to reimburse me for the hush money payments were signed by Donald Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg. The President of the United States thus wrote a personal check for the payment of hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws.
Was just part of Michael Cohen's opening statement. Let's head to Washington. Let's talk to our correspondent Nick Bryant. And Nick, extraordinary testimony we heard for almost 2 or 3 hours. At different stages you had to actually remind yourself he was talking about the President of the United States.
Yeah, in many ways Donald Trump has normalised the abnormal in Washington, so it's worth stressing that this is some of the most dramatic political theatre and dramatic congressional testimony that we have heard for decades in Washington. You have to go back really to the Iran-Contra hearings with Oliver North. Some people are likening it to when John Dean, who was a former aide of Richard Nixon, appeared before the Watergate committee. That gives you some of the sort of historical context about how explosive these allegations have been today. And one of the most explosive allegations of all was this revelation, according to Michael Cohen, that Donald Trump knew ahead of time during the 2016 campaign that WikiLeaks and its founder Julian Assange were about to dump all these emails that were hacked from the Democratic National Committee, hacked, US intelligence believes, of course, by the Russians. That was a new revelation. Michael Cohen also saying, of course, that Donald Trump ordered him to pay hush money to the porn star Stormy Daniels. We knew of that before because that was one of the allegations that Michael Cohen was found guilty of in a New York court and why he's off to prison. But to hear it from Michael Cohen himself in this dramatic setting of a congressional hearing was still in itself jaw-dropping.
And in terms of some of that evidence, you also had those conversations around the potential building of Trump Tower in Moscow. You had those comments about racism. Which of all of those many, many planks and allegations, which potentially is most perilous for Donald Trump?
I think the Roger Stone allegation is potentially perilous because it does indicate maybe some level of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin, although Michael Cohen didn't say that explicitly, and he didn't say that he had a smoking gun. All he said was he had suspicions on that front, and that is an area and that is a line that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, will be pursuing. The allegation of that Trump ordered him to pay hush money payments, well, that is in violation of campaign finance laws, potentially. That potentially is evidence of criminality. I think what he also said about some of Donald Trump's tax arrangements, that he'd inflated his income to get on the kind of Forbes rich list, but he deflated his income when it came to paying his taxes. Now that gives an opening for some of these Democratic-controlled committees to start investigating his tax. And as you know, Donald Trump has famously refused to hand over his tax returns, which is what sitting presidents normally do. So that opens up an area of potential legal jeopardy for the White House as well. I mean, these hearings are so contested. I mean, obviously, the Democrats have been very supportive of Michael Cohen. They've turned this former Trump lawyer almost into a kind of progressive folk hero. The Republicans, by contrast, of course, have tried to trash his reputation, reminding people, reminding viewers, reminding voters that he is off to prison in May, and one of the reasons he is off to prison is because he was found guilty of lying to Congress. But ultimately, a lot comes down to what Robert Mueller thinks of Michael Cohen. It's worth pointing out that his team, the special counsel's team, has conducted hours of interviews behind the scenes with Michael Cohen. What do they make about the credibility of his allegations? Because the Republicans have not been so effective today, Matthew. They've certainly trashed his reputation, but what they haven't been so successful at doing is undermining and challenging the allegations he's made against the president.
Nick, stay there because I'll come back to that point, but you talk about the Republicans and some of their questioning. I mean, they were savaging his credibility. They described him as a fake witness, his presence on Capitol Hill, a travesty, a pathological liar. I just want to play for our viewers watching just a few of those exchanges.
You lied on financial documents. So you lied to financial institutions in order to secure loans. So we've established that you lie on your taxes, you lie to banks, and you have been convicted of lying to Congress. It seems to me that there's not much that you won't lie about when you stand to gain from it.
Well, that was repeated by Republican after Republican. There were other lines of attack, though. Lawmakers accused him of trying to reduce his jail sentence, pay back for not getting a White House job, and he was quizzed as to why he worked for the president for so long.
Mr. Cohen, how long did you work for Donald Trump?
Approximately a decade.
10 years?
That's correct.
You said all these bad things about the president there in that last 30 minutes, and yet you worked for him for 10 years? All those bad things, I mean, if it's that bad, I can see you working for him for 10 days, maybe 10 weeks, maybe even 10 months. But you worked for him for 10 years.
Let's go back to Nick Bryant. Nick, he will have known that Republicans would have come after him like that. The White House had been saying for weeks he was a liar. It was laughable that he would be taken seriously because of all of that. Is that presumably why he also came armed with documents today?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, one of the most effective lines from the Republicans was that Michael Cohen had set history, had made history by appearing before a congressional committee after he had been convicted and sent to prison for lying to a congressional committee. That was a particularly effective line that a couple of those Republican congressmen deployed. But as you say, Michael Cohen has kept the receipts. He came with documentary evidence to prove in his mind the allegations that he has made against the president. And I think one thing's worth pointing out, Matthew, I mean, how you view this testimony will be determined to a large extent about how you view Donald Trump. It'll be viewed through the prism of the Trump presidency. If you're a supporter of Donald Trump, then you'll probably write all this off as fake news and lies from a disgraced former aide. If you're an opponent of Donald Trump, you regard Michael Cohen as something of a truth-telling hero. And that's why I go back to what Robert Mueller thinks. He's the special counsel. His determination of what Michael Cohen has said and what he has presented and the documentary evidence that he has provided is perhaps key here as he finalises that report that he's expected to send to the Attorney General of the United States sometime soon.
Nick Bryant live for us there in Washington. Thanks very much for that analysis. Well, that questioning continues on Capitol Hill, so let me take you back live and let's dip in once again.
Think of anything you have to gain at this point from lying. I mean, they talk about book deals and other things that you want to do, but I see a lot more that you could lose by telling the truth today, given the threats and other things that have been made against you and your family. So that's how I'm interpreting it. And of course, you brought documents with you as well to bolster the credibility of your testimony. I did want to go back to an earlier line of questioning regarding the preparation of your testimony before you came before the Intelligence Committee. You've talked about a meeting at the White House where the testimony was being reviewed. I think you said that there was at least one White House attorney, Jay Sekulow, who was there, and you acknowledged that there were some edits that were made to your testimony. So on that topic, who at the White House reviewed your testimony?
I don't know the answer to that. The document was originally created by myself, along with my attorney at the time, from McDermott, Will & Emery, and there was a joint defense agreement, so the document circulated around. I believe it was also reviewed by Abby Lowell, who represents Ivanka and Jared Kushner.
Why did you provide the testimony to the White House?
It was pursuant to the joint defense agreement that we were all operating under.
What were the edits that came back substantively on the testimony?
I'm sorry, I don't know, sir. I'd have to take a look at the document.
Did you have a reaction to why there might not have been, in a sense, a protest to what was going to be false testimony that was going to be provided?
No, sir, because the goal was to stay on message. It's just limit the relationship whatsoever with Russia. It was short. There's no Russian contacts. There's no Russian collusion. There's no Russian deals. That's the message. That's the same message that existed well before my need to come and testify.
So it's an example of where this idea, this mentality of you toe the line, whatever the storyline or the narrative of the day or the month or the year is going to be, you toe that line whether it results in false testimony or not.
I towed the party line, and I'm now suffering, and I'm going to continue to suffer for a while along with my family as a result of it, so yes.
Let me switch gears quickly before my time expires. And you may not have direct knowledge of some of these things, but you're offering us some very helpful perspective on how the Trump world operates. And frankly, another reason I find your testimony fairly compelling and credible is because a lot of the things you're describing, a lot of the behavior you're describing, is very consistent with what we all see every single day. So it's not a leap for us to arrive in the same place of perspective that you presented. I'm interested in some of the activities around the inaugural committee, the inauguration of the president. There was an article that appeared in ProPublica, it's a watchdog group, about some negotiation on pricing of things at the Trump hotel, where it looks like the rental that was being quoted was substantially, even double what you would expect to pay according to what the market should bear. And so in a sense, the Trump hotel was upcharging to the inaugural
Even I couldn't afford to stay there.
committee. Yeah. And so I'm just curious, do you have a sense of whether that kind of a practice is something that is consistent or inconsistent? Is it possible that that kind of upcharging could be done inside a Trump operation?
It did happen. And
Gentleman's time is expired.
what I can say to you is I wasn't part of the inaugural committee. I raised a lot of money for the inauguration, but I was not part of it, and there was a lot of things in that issue is something that's also, obviously, we've read about in the paper, being investigated at the current moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, it's on my heart to tell you, sir, that I'm sorry for what your family's going through. I feel for your family. The word tells us clearly that a man's mouth is his destruction and his lips are the snare of his soul. And I see you, a man trapped in that. However, I must tell you that I've arrested several thousand men, and you remind me of many of them. The ones that immediately become humble and remorseful at the time they're actually booked, and while they're incarcerated, they're quite penitent, and then return to their former selves when they're back on the street. So, respectful to your family and what they're going through, I owe you the honesty to tell you that that's my sense of you, good sir. I'm going to give you another opportunity to respond to what you brushed off earlier regarding your own statement during his testimony from C-SPAN notation at 2 hours and 50 seconds in. You stated regarding your credibility that you're being accused of having no credibility, that it is exactly for that reason I spent the last week searching boxes to find the information that I did, so that you don't have to take my word for it. I want you to look at the documents and make your own decisions. Now, the documents you're referring to, Mr. Cohen, are the documents that you submitted with your testimony today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you believe those documents to be worthy of evidence for this oversight hearing today?
I leave that to you to decide.
And I ask you again, sir, and please don't be incredulous, this is a serious question. Where are those boxes that contain documents worthy of evidence to be presented to Congress, and why have they not been turned over to investigating authorities looking into some of the many criminal activities that you're allegedly cooperating in? Where are these boxes? Who knows where is this treasure of evidence?
The boxes that I'm referring to were boxes that were in my law office when the FBI entered and seized documents.
Mr. Chairman, I would hope that the investigating authorities have noted what the gentleman had just stated, and that actions be taken for those boxes to be seized and reviewed based upon proper warrants signed by a sitting judge. You noted earlier today, Mr. Cohen, quite incredulously, one of my colleagues asked you regarding the television deal. You expressed wonderment that your predicament could possibly get you on television. It certainly got you on television today, has it not, sir?
So I was on television representing Mr. Trump going back into 2011.
Well, I didn't know who you were until today, really, until the FBI raided your home. Most of Americans didn't know who you were. How many attorneys do you think Mr. Trump has had through the course of his career? Quite a few, I would imagine. You're just one that's in a trap right now, and I understand you're trying to get out of it. You're in a bind. But I ask you, good sir, have you discussed film and book deals with your stated current attorney, Mr. Davis, Lanny Davis?
With Mr. Davis?
Yes.
No. But I have been approached by many people who are looking to do book deals, movie deals, and so on. So the answer
you're
to
right
that is
as an
yes.
American, but it leads me back to my instinct that compares you to many of the men that I've arrested during the course of my career. Mr. Chairman,
with all due respect, sir,
that our primary hearing to introduce the Oversight Committee, the 116th Congress of the American people, has manifested in the way that it obviously is. This is an attempt to injure our president and lay some sort of soft cornerstone for future impeachment proceedings. This is the full intent of the majority. I yield my remaining 30 seconds to the ranking member.
Mr. Cohen, earlier you said the United States Southern District of New York is not accurate in that statement.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Earlier you said that the United States Southern District of New York Attorney's Office, that statement is not accurate. You said it's not a lie, you said it's not accurate. You stand by that?
Yes, I did not want a role in the new administration.
So the court's wrong?
Sir, can I finish, please? I got exactly the role that I wanted. There is no shame in being personal attorney to the president. I got exactly what I wanted. I asked Mr. Trump for that job, and he gave it to me.
All I'm asking, if it could, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, you're saying that statement from the Southern District of New York attorneys is wrong.
I'm saying I didn't write it, and it's not accurate.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you. One of the most significant events in the last presidential campaign, of course, was the dump of emails stolen from the Democratic National Committee, dumped by WikiLeaks. Mr. Cohen, during your opening statement, which was at the height of the election, you testified you were actually meeting with Donald Trump in July 2016 when Roger Stone happened to call and tell Mr. Trump that he had just spoken to Julian Assange. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. And you said that Mr. Assange told Mr. Trump about an upcoming, quoting your opening statement, quote, massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. So I want to ask you about Roger Stone's phone call to the president. First of all, was that on speakerphone? Is that what you indicated?
Yes, so Mr. Trump has a black speakerphone that sits on his desk. He uses it quite often because with all the number of phone calls he gets.
Now, in January of this year, 2019, the New York Times asked President Trump if he ever spoke to Roger Stone about these stolen emails, and President Trump answered, and I quote, "No, I didn't. I never did." Was that statement by President Trump true?
No, it's not accurate.
And can you please describe for us, to the best of your recollection, you were present, exactly what Mr. Stone said to Mr. Trump?
It was a short conversation, and he said, Mr. Trump, I just want to let you know that I just got off the phone with Julian Assange, and in a couple of days, there's going to be a massive dump of emails. that's going to severely hurt the Clinton campaign.
And was Mr. Trump and Mr. Stone aware of where those emails came from?
That I'm not aware of.
Did Mr. Trump ever suggest then or later to call the FBI to report this breach?
He never expressed that to me.
Did the president at that time or ever since, in your knowledge, indicate an awareness that this conduct was wrong?
No.
The reason I ask is because on July 22nd, on the eve of the Democratic Convention, WikiLeaks published, as you know, the 20,000 leaked internal DNC emails. Could your meeting with Mr. Trump have been before that date?
Yes.
So Mr. Trump was aware of the upcoming dump before it actually happened?
Yes.
Right. And is there any record?
Though, sir, I don't know whether he knew or not, and I don't believe he did, what the substance of the dump was going to be, only that there was going to be a dump of emails.
And he was aware of that before the dump occurred, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And are there any records that would corroborate the day of this meeting, calendars perhaps?
I'm not in possession, but I believe, again, this is part of the special counsel, and they probably best suited to corroborate that information.
Was anyone else present in the room during the call?
I don't recall for this one, no, sir.
Is there anyone else the committee should talk to about the president's knowledge of the WikiLeaks email dump?
Well, again, when he called, Ronograph yelled out to Mr. Trump, "Rogers on line 1," which was regular practice.
And that's his assistant?
That's his, yes.
All right. And during a news conference on July 27th, 2016, then candidate Trump publicly appealed to Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's emails and make them public. He stated, and I quote, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing." Now, going back to Mr. Stone's phone call to the president, do you recall if Mr. Trump had knowledge of the WikiLeaks dump at the time of his direct appeal to Russia?
I am not.
But the call with Mr. Stone, you believe, was before
Yes.
this 27th?
Yes, I'm sorry. If you're, I thought you were talking about a different set of documents that got dumped. So I was in Mr. Trump's office, it was either July 18th or 19th, and yes, he went ahead. I don't know if the 35,000 or 30,000 emails was what he was referring to, but he certainly had knowledge.
All right, thank you. Just
Yes,
one
sir.
last question. Mr. Raskin had been asking you some questions, and one of the things in your answer was that Mr. Pecker expended other monies to protect Mr. Trump. Can you elaborate on what some of those other activities were?
Sure. There was the story about Mr. Trump having a love child with an employee, and actually the husband of that employee works for the company as well. And there was a elevator operator who claims that he overheard the conversation taking place between one of Mr. Trump's other executives and somebody, and he ended up paying like $15,000 in order to buy that story to find out whether it was true or not. And that's just one example of things that David had done over the years. It was the reason why in the recording, when David was looking to become the CEO of Time magazine, we were concerned about, we'll call it the treasure trove of documents that had been created over the years, that if he left, somebody could open up the key to a drawer and find all this information. So we were going to look to buy all of those life rights and so on.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Norman.
Mr. Cohen, thank you for testifying. I join Congressman Higgins in feeling for your family. They have no part in this. You know, I've heard all the testimony, and I'm trying to decide what Clay's trying to decide. Are you really sorry for what you did, or you just got caught? And the thing that amazed me is that in your opening statement, which, let me quote, "Last fall, I pled guilty in federal court to felonies for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in coordination with individual one." Was that President?
Yes, sir.
Okay, your crimes were of your own to benefit yourself.
Some of them, yes.
No, go through all the ones with the real estate, with the banks. On your HELOC loan, you failed to disclose more than $20 million in debt. You failed to disclose $70,000 in monthly payments. On your $14 million line of credit, you failed to disclose that you had drawn on that. So this was all for yourself. This wasn't for the benefit of President Trump. This was to benefit Michael Cohen. So that's my question. Did you just get caught? And you worked for this man for 10 years, Mr. Cohen. You came in here with these, he's a con man, he's a cheat. This is the very man that, didn't you wiretap him illegally? Did you not wiretap President Trump without his knowledge?
I did record Mr. Trump in a conversation, yes.
Is that lawyer-client privilege? Is that something that an honest guy would do, an honest lawyer?
I actually never thought that this was going to be happening and that recording even existed. I had forgotten.
But you did it.
Yes, I did.
Have you ever...
I had a reason for doing it.
What was your reason?
Because I knew he wasn't going to pay that money, and David Pecker had already chewed me out on multiple occasions regarding other monies that he expended.
But this is a man that you trusted, you take a bullet for, you secretly recorded. Let me ask you this, Mr. Cohen. Have you legally or illegally recorded other clients?
I have recordings of people, yes.
Legally or illegally?
I believe that they're legal.
Did you tell them?
In New York State, you don't have to do that.
So you didn't tell them?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Sometimes I also use the recordings for contemporaneous note-taking instead of writing it down. I find it easier.
If the shoe were reversed, would you like your trusted lawyer recording you?
I probably would not, no.
No, sir. It's untrustworthy. It's something people just would not do. Now, your bank loans that I just ran down, did you ever default on any of these loans?
No, sir.
So the bank didn't take any loss?
No bank has. I am not in default. I've never filed a bankruptcy. The HELOC you're referring to, I replaced that from a different HELOC. Paid it off. I owe no banks any money.
How about your medallion taxi cab? Did you have to sell that?
Well, the ones in Chicago, yes, I do have to sell. However, New York, the answer is no, I don't. And the industry is going through a major correction because of ride sharing. It's changed a lot of things.
The value of it has?
Yes, sir.
Right. So no bank, would the banks make you a loan again based on your record?
Actually, they did. They did. The bank actually redid and they refinanced the entire package.
Currently?
Post this, yes.
Okay, have they never had to do a loan loss reserve for the projected losses?
I don't know what they did, but it's still the same amount. I didn't get the benefit of it, no, sir.
Most likely they did. I was on an audit committee.
They may have done that, sir, but that's for their own banking, and not for me.
No, it's by law. If they suspect you of lying, which you admitted to, if they suspect you of maybe not being able to make a loan payment, they have to have a loan loss reserve that's 125% of what you. If it's $20 million, they have to post in their account $20 million plus. So they get no interest on it. And you know who pays for that? The American public who deals with that bank.
Yes, but sir, I'm not in default, and I'm current on each and every one of those medallion loans. And I've never owed any money to First Republic Bank. In fact, at the time that I had the HELOC, I had more cash sitting in that same bank than the HELOC and my mortgage combined.
Have you ever been to Prague?
I've never been to Prague.
Never have?
I've never been to the Czech Republic.
You'll balance my time.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Cohen. On page 5 of your statement, you say, and I quote, "You need to know that Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Tower negotiations." Who were those attorneys?
Jay Sekulow from the White House?
Yes.
Jay Sekulow, I believe Abby Lowell as well.
And you have a copy of your original statement that you can provide to the committee?
I can try to get that for you.
All right, if you would do that. The letter of intent for the Moscow Tower was in the fall of 2015, correct?
Correct.
Was there an expiration date on that letter of intent?
There was no expiration
So it
date.
could technically still be in effect today.
Oh, no, it's been terminated.
It has been terminated.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did Mr. Trump tell you to offer Vladimir Putin a free penthouse?
No, ma'am.
So where
that
does
was
that come
that was Felix Sater. It was a marketing stunt that he spoke about.
So Felix Sater had suggested to you that Mr. Trump offer a penthouse to Mr. Putin?
Yes, because it would certainly drive up the price per square foot. No different than in any condo where they start listing celebrities that live in the property.
In 2016, did you travel to Europe?
Yes,
Did you meet with persons associated with the Moscow Tower project?
no.
It was for personal? Or
Personal. My daughter was studying at Queen Mary in London.
So you did not meet with any Russians?
No.
There is an elevator tape that has been referenced as a catch and kill product. It was evidently of Mr. Trump and a woman, presumably Mrs. Trump, is that correct?
Are we talking about in Moscow or the Trump Tower elevator tape?
There's an elevator tape that went up for auction, ostensibly in 2016, is
Yes,
that
I've
correct?
heard about this.
And who was on that tape?
It's Mr. Trump with Melania.
And what happened in that tape?
But the story goes that he struck Melania while in that elevator because there's a camera inside, which I'm not so sure. Actually, I'm certain it's not true. I've heard about that tape for years. I've known 4 or 5 different people, including folks from AMI, who have
But there was some
claimed.
tape that went up for auction, correct?
I don't believe that auction was real, and I don't believe Mr. Trump ever struck Mrs. Trump, ever. I don't believe it.
And are you aware of anyone purchasing that tape then?
I don't believe it was ever.
So you never
purchased.
saw this tape?
No, ma'am, and I know several people who went to go try to purchase it for catch and kill purpose. It doesn't exist.
right.
Mr. Trump would never, in my opinion, that's not
Good to
something
know,
that he
good
is
to
not.
know. Is there a love child?
There is not, to the best of my
So
knowledge.
you would pay off someone to
It
not
wasn't me, ma'am.
report-
It was AMI. It was David Pecker.
So he paid off someone about a love child that doesn't exist.
Correct. It was about $15,000.
Okay. How many times did Mr. Trump ask you to threaten an individual or entity on his behalf?
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably. Over the 10 years.
Over the 10 years, he asked you,
And when you say threaten, I'm talking with litigation or an argument with
intimidation.
a nasty reporter that is writing an article.
What do you know about, let's go to your tapes. You said there's probably 100 tapes,
Voice recordings,
voice recordings. And will you make them available to the committee?
if you would really like them.
Did Mr. Trump tape
Don't you have to gavel that, sir?
We would.
Sorry.
Mr. Trump, did Mr. Trump tape any conversations?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Were you involved in the $25 million settlement to Trump University?
I had a role in that, yes.
Who paid the settlement?
I believe it was Mr. Trump. I don't know the answer to
You
that.
don't know the answer, but you were involved in the...
Yes, in a different aspect.
There's some reference to a businessman in Kansas being involved in that. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
All right. Finally, in my 13 seconds left, what do you want your children to know?
That I'm sorry for everything, and I'm sorry for the pain that I've caused them. And I wish I can go back in time.
Thank you. I yield back.
Young lady's time has expired. To the members of the committee, before we go to Ms. Miller, so that you can properly plan. There's a vote apparently coming up in about 10 to 20 minutes. And what we will do is we will recess and we will come back, listen up, 30 minutes after the last vote begins. Got that? Not it ends. 30 minutes after it begins, and we'll do that promptly. All right? All right, Ms. Miller.
I am very disappointed to have you in front of this committee today. Quite frankly, this isn't the reason the people of West Virginia sent me to Congress. I find this hearing not in the best interest of the American people. This is another political game with the sole purpose of discrediting the president. If it was not already obvious, there are members here with a singular goal in Congress: to impeach President Trump. To achieve this goal, they will waste not only precious taxpayer dollars, but also time in this committee and Congress as a whole. In fact, they will go so far as to bring a convicted felon in front of our committee. We are supposed to take what you say, Mr. Cohen, at this time about President Trump as the truth. But you're about to go to prison for lying. How can we believe anything you say? The answer is, we can't. This begs the question, why are those in the majority holding this hearing? I am appalled. We could be focused on actual issues that are facing America, like border security, neonatal abstinence syndrome, or improving our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Instead, the Democrats are trying to grasp at straws. Let's talk about this witness. From his sentencing hearing in the Southern District of New York, Judge Pauley stated, Mr. Cohen pled guilty to a veritable smorgasbord of fraudulent conduct, willful tax evasion, making false statements to a financial institution, illegal campaign contributions, and making false statements to Congress. Each of the crimes involved deception, and each appears to have been motivated by personal greed and ambition. This is who we have in front of us today in our committee. Someone who is about to be sent to prison for 3 years for evading his taxes, deceiving a financial institution, lying to Congress, among other counts. One of the most appalling facts about this hearing is that Mr. Cohen has used his experiences with President Trump both before and after he was elected for his own greed and profit. I'd like some yes or no answers. Isn't it true you tried to sell a book about your time with President Trump entitled Trump Revolution: From the Tower to the White House, Understanding Donald J. Trump?
Yes, that happened early on when I was still even part, I believe, of the RNC.
And this book deal, which you had with Hatchet Books, was worth around $500,000. Isn't that correct?
No more, ma'am.
How much more?
I think it was about $750.
Wow. Mr. Cohen,
I did turn it down.
given that you continue to profit from publicly discussing your time with Mr. Trump, I worry that this committee hearing the majority has given you will only serve as a platform for you to continue to lie and sensationalize and exaggerate wherever it suits you. Do you plan to pursue another book deal about your experiences?
Yes.
I would presume this book would be a little different than your latest pitch, but your new angle might please some new fans. Anything to sell books. Mr. Chairman, we've canceled hearings on child separation and on other issues that are close to my heart for this media circus. What a waste of time and money for a man who has gladly exploited the name of the president to promote his own name and fill his own pockets. It pains me that we are sitting here adding another chapter to his book.
And you're
Thank you,
watching.
and I yield the remainder of
You're
my
watching
time to Mr.
BBC
Jordan.
News. This is coverage of the hearings involving Michael Cohen, the former personal lawyer to Donald Trump during his time both as a businessman and subsequently once he became president of the United States. This testimony continues with us on BBC News, coming up at the top of the hour, Beyond 100 Days.
Pay to make sure a story about a non-existent tape never became public.
No, sir, that's not what I said.
They were willing to stop a false tape?
We learned that this tape was potentially on the market and that it existed. And so what we did is exactly what we did with all the other catch and kill. We looked for it. And if in fact that it did exist, we would have tried to stop it. That's what I would have done.
False tape.
But it's a false tape. I've never heard it, and I can assure you one thing about Mr. Trump. Many things, he would never, ever do something like that. I don't see it.
Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cohen, I'd like to ask you more about the details of the $130,000 payment you made to Stephanie Clifford, the adult film actress known as Stormy Daniels, in order to purchase her silence shortly before the 2016 elections. First, according to documents filed by federal prosecutors in New York, you created a shell company called Essential Consultants, LLC. Is that correct?
It's correct.
And you created this company for the purpose of making the payment to Ms. Clifford. Is that correct?
Amongst other things, yes.
You then used a home equity line of credit to fund the account in the name of Essential Consultants, LLC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You then wired $130,000 to the attorney representing Ms. Clifford at that time and wrote in the memo field for the wire the word, quote, retainer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you tell us why you decided to use this complicated process to make this payment?
Well, starting an LLC is not a sophisticated means. LLC, you call up a company, you pay for it, and they open it for you. And the reason that I used the home equity line of credit as opposed to cash that I had in the same exact bank was I didn't want my wife to know about it because she handles all of the banking. And I didn't want her coming to me and asking me what was the $130,000 for. And then I was going to be able to move money from one account to the other and to pay it off because I didn't want to have to explain to her what that payment was about. I sent it to the IOLA account, the interest on a lawyer's account, to Keith Davidson in California, Ms. Daniels' attorney. He would hold it in escrow until such time as I received the executed NDA, non-disclosure agreement.
Did Mr. Trump know you were going through this process to hide the payment?
Yes.
Why not just use Mr. Trump's personal or company bank account to make the payment? Why was the distraction so important besides you not wanting your wife to know?
What his concern was that there would be a check that has his very distinct signature onto it. And even after she cashed the check, all you need to do is make a photocopy of it, and it's kind of proof positive on exactly what took place. So here the goal was to keep him far away from it as possible.
Can anyone corroborate what you have shared with us?
Absolutely.
And that is?
Keith Davidson, Alan Weisselberg, President Trump.
You're watching BBC News. This is coverage of Michael Cohen, the former lawyer of Donald Trump, giving testimony to a US congressional committee. He says President Trump is a racist, a liar and a cheat, that he knew in advance about emails that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign, that he planned to build a Trump Tower in Moscow later than he had alleged it was still being progressed during the 26th campaign, but he says that he did not know of any collusion between President Trump and Russia, the centre of the allegations made against the president. Coverage continues on BBC News. Shortly we'll be joining Beyond 100 Days.
You're watching Beyond 100 Days. Donald Trump had no desire to lead America, only to market himself and build his own wealth.
That's the blockbuster testimony of the president's former fixer. But Michael Cohen has lied to Congress before. Republicans say he's not credible.
Mr. Cohen admits he's often lied to protect the president, but now he says he is exposing Mr. Trump's true intentions.
Donald Trump is a man who ran for office to make his brand great, not to make our country great.
Split screen. Michael Cohen on Capitol Hill competes with Donald Trump in Vietnam. Will the lawyer's testimony impact the president's nuclear summit?
Also on the programme, British MPs are about to have their say on the next steps for Brexit in a series of votes here in Westminster this evening. Plus, tensions between India and Pakistan continue to escalate as the two countries engage in tit-for-tat airstrikes.